Good evening. I'm Dr. Linda Scott, Dean at the University of Wisconsin-Madison School of Nursing. I am delighted that you could join us for the 22nd Littlefield Leadership Lecture. Hosting this event reflects the mission and vision of the UW-Madison School of Nursing to educate nurses who are prepared to lead in the profession and society and to improve health for all people. As in past years, our Littlefield lecture audience is made up of individuals that represent a variety of roles within the nursing profession, as well as interprofessional colleagues in healthcare. I am also pleased to welcome those of you from outside of healthcare who share a conviction to advance social justice. Our work and our progress will be incomplete if we do not come together across professions, perspectives, identities, and life experiences to work and advocate for equity. It is a pleasure to gather in this spirit to learn more about these topics from our 2021 Littlefield Lecture presenter, Dr. Ernest Grant. It is also important and relevant to acknowledge that the physical campus of UW-Madison on the shore of Lake Mendota is on Ho-Chunk land. We respect the history, culture, and inherent sovereignty of the Ho-Chunk Nation and the 11 other members of the First Nations of Wisconsin. We value the presence, contributions, and leaderships of Indigenous people today and in the future. Our commitment to teaching, learning, and research on this land includes addressing the persistent health disparities that have resulted from our history. I am proud that tonight's Littlefield lecture aligns with this need to understand and intervene on inequities. Our annual Littlefield lectures provide an opportunity to hear from nurse leaders on complex issues that impact the health of individuals, families, communities, and populations. I would like to thank the Friends of Littlefield for conceiving this tradition and supporting this lecture series. It is a gift to the School of Nursing. This lecture series was established to honor Dr. Vivian Littlefield for her service to UW-Madison School of Nursing. As many of you know, Dr. Littlefield is Emerita Dean and Professor of the School of Nursing, holding the deanship from 1984 until 1999. Throughout her career, and still as an emerita, she is a respected dean, professor, colleague, and mentor. Vivian is also a recognized expert in women's health, nursing care delivery, and the impact of alternative approaches to care on patient outcomes. And she served as National Chair of Nursing for the American Red Cross. Vivian is a member of the American Nurses Association and Sigma Theta Tau International, and is also a fellow in the American Academy of Nursing. Her legacy in the profession includes her dedication to mentorship for countless nursing students and nurse researchers. Dr. Littlefield is a passionate advocate for nursing leadership. In addition to her legacy of leadership as dean, she envisioned nursing education and research as its own academic unit. It was through her advocacy that Sidney Scott Cooper Hall became a reality and a home for the School of Nursing. Her leadership inspired this lecture series, which bears her name. Vivian, thank you for your impact on the School of Nursing and for your contributions to this profession. I have one last thank you to offer, and that is to the Board of Visitors of the School of Nursing. Board members provide expertise and support for the initiatives that we do in the school and are invaluable to us. Thank you for your leadership. And now it is my pleasure to introduce our 2021 Littlefield Leadership Lecture presenter, Dr. Ernest J. Grant. Dr. Grant is the 36th president of the American Nurses Association and the first man to be elected to this role. As the ANA president, Dr. Grant represents the interest of the nation's 4.2 million registered nurses. With more than 30 years of nursing experience, he is a distinguished leader. an internationally recognized burn care and fire safety expert. Among other accolades, he was presented with a Nurse of the Year award in 2002 from President George W. Bush for his work treating burn victims from the World Trade Center attack. Dr. Grant has utilized his training in emergency settings to advance the important role of nursing in promoting wellness and to guide the ANA's priorities during the COVID-19 pandemic. Additionally, he has led the ANA in its launch of the National Commission to Address Racism in Nursing to examine the impact of racism on nurses, patients, communities, and healthcare systems. Dr. Grant was inducted as a fellow into the American Academy of Nursing in 2014 and was the 2021 recipient of the Academy's Civitas Award for his visionary leadership. I invited Dr. Grant to provide the keynote presentation for the Littlefield Leadership Lecture Series because he is truly a nurse leader for the profession and society. His deep commitment to improving lives and his capability as an agent of change has been clear throughout his career. The timing of his service as president of the ANA during the time of a pandemic and a period of social unrest has made his impact even more critical. Dr. Grant's reassertion of our social mandate to protect the public and the role of advocacy in nursing has been a guiding force for us throughout the profession. It is my pleasure to welcome Dr. Grant, who will speak on nurse advocacy, social justice, and health equity, a call to action. At the conclusion of his presentation, I will rejoin him on screen to facilitate responses to your questions that you may submit through the chat feature. Dr. Grant, the virtual platform is yours.
Well, thank you very much, Dean Scott. It is indeed an honor to be here with you tonight. And for Dean Emeritus Littlefield, it is indeed an honor to be chosen at this particular point in time to deliver the Littlefield Lecture. I also would like to bring greetings to the faculty and the students of the School of Nursing as well. It's indeed an honor to be here tonight. What I had planned to do is to sort of, I guess, do maybe the beginnings of a fireside chat and some musings on my my thoughts about nurse advocacy, social justice, and health equity, and hopefully stimulate that it would be a call to action for everyone who is listening tonight. So without further ado, we will try to see if the slides will work. So it looks like that they will, and although I'll ask Andy if he would mind advancing to the next slide, please. I do just have a couple of slides about the American Nurses Association that, I mean, wouldn't be president if I didn't talk about my association, right? So sometimes, though, you may hear the term ANA Enterprise and perhaps not fully understand what that may mean, but that is the family of the American Nurses Association, the American Nurses Foundation, and the American Nurses Credentialing Center. These three entities combined make up what we call the ANA Enterprise. And from professional development through advocacy to credentialing and grants, the enterprise is the leading resource for nurses to help equip them with the tools and information and network that they need in order to continue their profession. Next slide, please. A few words about ANA itself. As Dean Scott mentioned, we do represent the interests of the nation's 4.3 million registered nurses. We're at the forefront of improving the quality of care for all. Our core functions is advocacy and professional development, but we could not do that alone. Obviously, we do that in partnership with our 50 constituent and state nurses association and 39 organizational affiliates as well, to speak as one strong voice for the profession. So we're extremely happy to have that that honor. And I would like to say, as a side note, that ANA is currently celebrating its 125th year of serving the nursing profession with all the work that we do. So next slide, please. And now to just sort of take the next few minutes to talk a little bit about what is going on within the profession, particularly when it comes to addressing diversity, equity, inclusion, racism, inequality, and social justice issues. The pandemic, as you know, has demanded most of our attention over the past 19 months. And as an organization, as a profession, and as a nation, over the last year and a half, we have stayed focused like a laser on trying to return the country back to as near normal as possible. However, other issues have also required our response and engagement as well. This pandemic has both exacerbated and shined a light on healthcare disparities and on racism. This is something that members of the BIPOC community knew existed all along. But there's an old saying that says, shining the light is the best disinfectant. And I'd like to also add that the best moral disinfectant is publicity. So as nurses, we need to continue to stress and address the need for respect, equity, inclusion, and social justice within healthcare, within the nursing profession, and within society as a whole. There are two separate worlds as nurses that practice are people too. Nurses endure the same positive and pitfalls as members of society. So let's not forget that nurses are also consumers of health care and other industries too. There's absolutely no protective bubble for nurses as we represent the numerous populations in group. Now, we know that nurses come from various backgrounds, from various genders and sexual entities, religions, denominations, and walks of life. We also have families that are productive members of the community, and we ourselves are productive members of the communities as well that we live and work within as well. Next slide, please. As implied, racism is a long-standing public health crisis that impacts mental, spiritual, and physical health. As I mentioned earlier, COVID-19 has exacerbated this crisis and added to the stress in Black and other communities of color, which are experiencing higher rates of infections and deaths. And I've made this commitment numerous times, or have made this comment numerous times about racism being a longstanding public health crisis. Some of the underlying factors that are driving this disproportionate burden of disease are the social determinants of health, meaning the social and economical factors that contribute to poor access to health care and poor health status, including high incidence of chronic disease such as diabetes and hypertension. But again, just keep in mind that to remain silent is to be complicit. Next slide, please. Now, I'm proud to say that during our 2020 membership assembly, ANA's highest governing body adopted a resolution on racial justice for communities of color. It reaffirmed ANA's position against racism, discrimination, and healthcare disparities. Now, this was brought about not only because of what we were seeing as a result of COVID shining the light on the disproportionate in healthcare in communities of color, but also after the death of George Floyd and other Black Americans at the hands of police officers as well. Part of this resolution outlines the actions that ANA, with its constituent and state nurses association and our individual membership division, pledged to take. Some of those included things such as oppose and address all forms of racism and discrimination, condemn brutality by law enforcement and all acts of violence, champion the code of ethics for nursing. And in partnership with nurses everywhere, we would educate, advocate, and collaborate to end systemic racism, particularly within nursing. We would advance institutional and legislative policies that promote diversity, equity, inclusion, and social justice for all. Advocate for the ending of health inequities within communities and healthcare systems that stems from systemic racism. And finally, promote deliberate and respectful dialogue, effective listening, and commitment to change as a means to improve the health of all individuals in the communities where they live and work. You can also read some of the other components of this by going to nursingworld.org and looking at the resolution. Next slide, please. As part of this commitment to work as well, obviously ANA is committed to that, and our code of ethics demand no less. As nurses, we accept and care for people as they are. The code calls on us to recognize human dignity regardless of their race, their culture, their creed, their sexual orientation, their ethnicity, their gender, their age, their experiences, or any other aspect of identity. It beckons us to protect human rights and reduce health disparities. Additionally, though, our code of ethics for nurses also define advocacy as the act or the process of pleading for, supporting, or recommending a cause or course of action. And at ANA, we believe that advocacy is a pillar of nursing. You know, as nurses, we instinctively care for and advocate for our patients in our workplace and in our communities. But when it comes to legislative or political advocacy, that's no less important to advancing the profession, patient care, and accomplishing substantial changes in promoting health equity as well. So we must not forget that the profession was founded and evolved from political action and strong advocacy. Advocating for the profession, the healthcare consumer, and communities that we serve is not optional. It's a part of nursing's genetic code and makeup. Next slide, please. As nurses also, we must find our voice, particularly during times like these. You know, the act of caring requires intentional actions and advocacy. A lack of action is in the form of silence, is complicity. Now, the flames that you see here on this slide is in the professional nursing model by Dr. Barzak, representing caring, values, wisdom, and energy with ethics at the base. Caring is being called out here as a basic tenet of the profession that is inherent in every nurse. Every caring relationship from a nurse must start with respect for the autonomy and the rights of the healthcare consumer. The values component of the flame represents respect, inspiration, and empathy. Overall, respect is about the importance of relationships, service, willingness to bear witness, self-determination in the pursuit of health. Respect does not occur without dignity. The backbone of dignity is mattering. Mattering is an ideal state of two complementary psychological experiences, feeling valued and adding value. Human beings can feel valued by and add value to ourselves, others, work, and our communities. So to make sure that the need for mattering is fulfilled, we as nurses must balance feeling valued with adding value. Moreover, nursing is one of the most selfless professions in the world. It has a duty to strive for the counterbalance of caring for self as well as caring for others. Next slide, please. Now, the Reverend Martin Luther King Jr., Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., addressed the issue of inequity and injustice in healthcare at a convention of the Medical Committee for Human Rights back in 1966. And yet, in 2021, healthcare inequity remains a top and pressing concern. Registered nurses, we must promote equity, diversion, and inclusion in all aspects of health and healthcare while advancing organizational policies, programs, services, and practice. Leaders must come together at the local, state, and national level and commit to sustainable efforts to address racism and discrimination, police brutality, and basic human rights. We must hold ourselves and our leaders accountable to committing to reform and action. Next slide, please. Nurses can continue to add value by understanding their critical role in addressing equity also. You know, equity is one of those things that falls within the continuous range of ethical issues or dilemmas that nurses face on a daily basis. One of the biggest one is trust versus distrust of the healthcare system. In America, we have a long-standing history of racism, discrimination across our society and within our healthcare system that have caused Blacks, brown, and other many minorities to be distrustful of our healthcare system. Decades of distrust have exacerbated preventable chronic health conditions, maternal death rates, and more in these communities because they do not feel that their voices will be heard or that they will receive proper care. So as a result, many don't seek timely health care and don't have the tools or the resources in the education to live a healthy life. What we're seeing this play out and have seen it play out in the COVID-19 crisis, where the disproportionate impact in cases and deaths within the Black and brown communities is very disturbing. We must put in place solutions now if we want a fighting chance at rebuilding the trust. Being representatives of the communities that we serve and drawing from my own experience is something that that really reinforces to me even more so that we must put those solutions in place. Another form of equity is the access to healthcare by Blacks and other minorities. We must also recognize that social economic challenges that create barriers to access to care, discrimination, poverty, food deserts, lack of access to quality healthcare and education, good jobs, hazardous environment, all these are things that we need to address as well. And I'm proud to say that in May of last year, I shared testimony with the House Committee on Ways and Means on the disparate impact of COVID-19 on these communities. ANA shared recommendations specifically related to COVID-19 and to address longstanding issues of racial disparities, such as the crisis of maternal mortality and basic access to health care, including mental health services. So what are some of the things that we as nurses can do to help begin tearing down these walls of racism? Well, first of all, use your voice and influence to educate others about the systemic injustice, the health inequities, and health disparities. Educate yourself and then use your trusted voice to influence and educate others about the systemic injustice that have caused the riots and the protests being covered in the news. Listen, and when I say listen, I mean actively listen and engage in dialogue with others. Be aware of your own conscious bias and stand up for inequity and call it out whenever you see it. Next slide, please. I am proud to say that the American Nurses Association recognizes progress in most national efforts to eliminate discrimination associated with race, gender, social economic status through improving access into attainment of healthcare and quality healthcare. However, concerted efforts must continue for discrimination to be eliminated in all forms. ANA recognizes impartiality begins at the level of the individual nurse and should occur within every healthcare organization. All nurses must recognize the potential impact of unconscious bias and practices contributing to discrimination and actively seek opportunities to promote inclusion of all people in the provision of quality healthcare while eradicating disparities. ANA support policy initiatives directed toward abolishment of all forms of discrimination. Back in 2015, actually, ANA stated that discrimination in any form is harmful to society as a whole and in opposition to the values in the ethical code of the nursing profession, which directs the nurse to respect the inherent dignity, worth, unique attributes, and human rights of all individuals. Now, you may recall that this strong position statement that you see with a strong stance against discrimination in healthcare, but it doesn't directly address some of the causes of discrimination, including racism, and therefore we're tirelessly working to elevate awareness of racism and harms associated with it. Through the work of the commission, which I'll talk about in just a moment, this is not an issue that can be quickly fixed or a short-term issue. It's a lifelong issue, and we will continue to work towards racial and social justice and equity. Now, you probably, if you are a member of ANA, you probably were notified that ANA just issued a new scope and practice standard. And in the latest edition of that standard, we insisted on a departure from the traditional educational requirements of cultural competence training. We argued that a process or journey must be embarked upon for lifelong learning. The journey is a deep understanding that informs acceptance of others, which is not easily achieved using a reductionist method of reading a few paragraphs about those who differ in their background and experiences. We propose a long-term investment to achieve deepening cultural humility, which is an endless commitment to learning to inform the continuous reshape of our worldview. This will pave the way for harmony, for grace and understanding towards each other and those that we serve and care for as well. Next slide, please. So when we talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion, otherwise phrased as DEI, these are concepts that typically are looped together. These concepts have taken center stage since the senseless murder of George Floyd last May. Healthcare and professionals of nursing is facing a hard reckoning. We're taught to treat each patient with respect and dignity, regardless of their culture, race, religion, and all the other identifiers as we talked about. And as we want to open our professional doors to nurses from all backgrounds. The reality, however, is that we have a lot more work to do before we can call ourselves a model of diversity, equity, and inclusion. To start, we need to clean our own house. We must acknowledge and apologize for the segregation that nurses were subjected to in the past. And I have the ANA staff working on an apology statement, which hopefully will be ready before the end of the year. But know that eradicating racism in nursing begins with us. Next slide, please. Recognizing that, last fall, ANA's board of directors voted to convene a steering group to explore racism in nursing and created a national action plan to guide diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts within the profession. The National Commission to Address Racism in Nursing emerged. The commission is led by the ANA, the National Black Nurses Association, the National Coalition of Ethnic Minority Nurses Association, and the National Association of Hispanic Nurses. The commission has approved its vision, mission, and goals, as you see here, and added a definition of racism that will be used in conjunction with the work of the commission. And I'm proud to say that this definition of racism is a nursing definition. ANA also announced the selection of Dr. G. Rumey Alexander as the scholar in resident who focuses on addressing the persistent problem of systemic racism in the nursing profession. And as ANA scholar in residence, Dr. Alexander will engage with ANA and the commission to support the scholarly underpinnings that will help propel the national discussion. And by leading national discussions within nursing professions, the commission aims to own, amplify, understand, and change how racism negatively impacts colleagues, patients, families, and communities, as well as the healthcare system. I encourage nurses to become role models of anti-racism for other professions to follow. And we must be intentional and do more to bring in more minorities and men into our profession. Next slide, please. Since the inception of the commission, it has been intentional and bold in leading a national discussion to address racism in nursing and to create safe and liberating environments as well as an anti-racist profession for all nurses. 4 key work groups are working to contribute to an action-oriented approach across the spectrum of education, practice, policy, and research. In addition, we have engaged in 6 listening sessions so far with approximately 12 to 15 nurses, particularly nurses of color, to learn more about their experiences as nurses of color, strategies that they use to cope, and possible solutions. Through these 6 sessions, there's been some remarkable similarity in experiences. There's a heavy emphasis on listening during these sessions. You may not get all the questions, get the answers. Excuse me, you may not get all the questions, but many have used one or two, depending on how the conversation is going. Facilitating these types of sessions requires some skills in helping to manage the storytelling while also helping to bring out all the voices in the room. And a more fulsome toolkit will be forthcoming as the work of the commission continues. The commission is facilitating a national discussion about experiences of nurses of color and the impact of systemic racism. And we aim, the aim of developing an action-oriented strategy for change. The commission meets monthly to explore the issues of systemic racism within nursing through the varied insights and perspectives to include subject matter experts and scholars on the issue as well. Some of our upcoming events is on November 2nd. We will have a summit in regards to that. On November 17th, Navigate Nursing webinar featuring Marcus Henderson and Dr. David Williams, Future of Nursing co-chair and subject matter expert on racism in the public health. We also, the first quarter of 2022, will have a quick video series on anti-racist behavior. The first and third quarter of 2022, there would be Racism Echo Educational Series. May of 2022, we are anticipating the first committee report, which will be a scope and practice standards. And in the third quarter of 2022, there will be a virtual forum on racism in nursing as well. Next slide, please. Currently, there is a survey which I would encourage everyone to please take. This is we invite all nurses from all backgrounds, races, and ethnicity to participate in the survey on racism in nursing in the workplace. You can see there the survey link underneath the picture there, or you could go to nursingworld.org and type in racism survey as well. But it is important that we capture all perspectives and insights, the good and the bad. That is the key to forge change within the nursing profession. This survey is very brief and will take only about 6 minutes to complete. And as I said, the link to the survey is there. The one caveat is that we are running out of time. The survey is only available until 12 o'clock midnight on October 28th. So I would encourage you to please, between now and the 28th, please go and access that site there. Next slide, please. So one of the things that ANA has also done is prioritize caring for nurses during a frustrating and scary time for healthcare workers. As nurses, we learn how to process death, but the number of patients that have been dying daily from COVID was unprecedented, even for the most seasoned among us. Nurses are burnt out. They're feeling like they've gone beyond their capacity. And as we navigate the pandemic impact, health disparities, racial inequity, and workplace and community violence, I know they're saying, I can't give much more. But there's some things that I would encourage us all to do. Next slide, please. One of the things that we've been very grateful for at the beginning of the pandemic is to do surveys with the help of the American Nurses Foundation to find out what is going on in the minds of nurses. What are nurses experiencing? And we've been able to collect data from nurses about their experiences on the front line, and that has been a priority of the ANA and the foundation. We're listening and we are responding. The American Nurses Foundation and ANA launched a series of surveys, as I said. 7 surveys were conducted in 2020. All data gathered as part of the Pulse on the Nation's Nurses Survey series will be used to inform decisions about how to best support nurses during and after this public health crisis. In March of this year, the American Nurses Foundation released the results of a 1-year COVID-19 Impact Access Survey. In the latest survey of 22,000 nurses nationwide, the survey covered pressing topics such as the nursing profession today, including mental health, vaccines, finances, PPEs, and more. And through these various surveys, we have heard from more than 110,000 nurses. Sadly, though, the results have shown that the continued toll of this pandemic has taken on nurses' mental health, with 85% reporting that they are exhausted, and 18% even noting that they intend to leave their current position, largely because they feel work is negatively affecting their health and well-being. Next slide, please. BIPOC nurses also have a higher likelihood to contract COVID-19 and experience financial implications during this pandemic compared to their white counterparts. And through our surveys, we have learned that BIPOC nurses were less likely to seek out professional mental health support. All of this on top of the growing concerns of the race battle fatigue as well. Race battle fatigue as a theoretical framework that addresses the psychological and physiological strains exacted on racially marginalized group and the amount of energy lost dedicated to coping with racial microaggressions and racism. People of color experience daily battles of attempting to deflect racism, stereotypes, and discrimination in predominantly white spaces, and must always be on guard or wary of the next attack that they may face. The psychological symptoms of racial battle fatigue includes anxiety, emotional and social withdrawal, denial, anger, nightmare, and hypervigilance. Some of the physiological symptoms includes an upset stomach, tension, headaches, high blood pressure, loss of appetite, elevated heart rate, and ulcers. So where racial battle fatigue goes untreated or is dismissed, this stress-related psychological and physiological disease can be lethal and can kill gradually and stealthily through hypertension and poor health attitudes and behaviors as well. Next slide, please. So to begin to address all of this, in May, the National Academy of Medicine, as we all know, released its long-awaited report on the future of nursing 2020-2030, charting a path to achieve health equity. The vision, part of the recommendation, focused on current and future challenges impacting the nursing workforce, its leadership and education in order to reduce health disparities and address social determinants of health to advance health equity, which aligns with much of what we've been hearing from nurses and what ANA is striving to address as well. So some significant work is already underway with the ANA enterprise to align with the goals and the objectives to shape the future of nursing practice and healthcare. Some of this work includes, again, addressing racism within the nursing profession, leveraging the power of nurse-led innovation to drive and lead transformative change, advancing priority nursing practice, policy, and advocacy issues, calling for major investment in nursing education, promoting nurses' health and well-being through programs like Healthy Nurse, Healthy Nation and the Well-Being Initiative, and increasing awareness of the values of credentialing among individual registered nurses, the programs and organizations as well. Next slide, please. So as you can see, we have our plate full, but I just want to do a quick recap of what is going on, because when I assumed the presidency 3 years ago, an ongoing priority of my presidency at that time, and still is to increase the diversity of nurses in practice and to better reflect our nation's population. It's also critical that everyone feels welcome in nursing and ANA and all that is supported, and everyone is supported throughout their career as well. And I want to say here that I take seriously the responsibility to lead ANA during these turbulent times. ANA is committed to implementing comprehensive strategies to address these inequities. As nurses, again, I must say that we must continue to take action and to advocate for the commitment to social justice and health through actions and advocacy to address the social determinants of health and promote well-being in every zip code. For social systems and structures by using our voice to drive transformative, action-oriented policies and address inequities and promote social justice. For the professional nursing organizations to actively engage in the political process, particularly those that address public health and the profession of nursing. and for the advancement of nursing agenda for the overall health and safety of the public, and finally, for an upending of the roots of the structural inequities and social injustice within healthcare as well. So with that, I will say thank you for the opportunity to present a little bit of my slide and my side and what we are doing and are achieving within ANA. I look forward to answering your questions, and so I will turn it back over to the dean, and we'll have our little fireside chat.
Thank you, Dr. Grant, for an excellent presentation on very important topics. We do have some questions that have come forward in the chat, and I'd like to start with one of our international attendees. He's really interested in hearing more about how state-based nursing regulators in the U.S. have been addressing issues of cultural safety and racism in healthcare. You've spoken about the work that ANA has done as a professional organization under your leadership. Can you speak to changes that regulators may be doing in order to address these issues?
Yes, thank you, and thank the person who asked that question. I did not go deliberately into it, but you will recall that well, first of all, I did mention the 4 groups that are co-leading the Commission to Address Racism in Nursing, but we have just about every nursing organization at the table. There's actually a total of, I believe, 39 commissioners. That's not even including individuals who are serving as subject matter experts as well. But the whole idea with that, if you recall, I said that the commission work will be towards nursing education, clinical practice, research, and advocacy. So getting around to to answer the question, our hope is that once our document comes out, which will be scope and practice standards, related to that, that regulatory agencies such as the National League of Nursing, they will go in and evaluate if they're doing a survey of a nursing program. Hopefully they will adopt our practice standards. And so that will become part of the review. So when they're at a nursing school, they will say, we have adopted the scope and practice standards of the Commission to Address Racism in Nursing. Show us how you are incorporating that in your educational curriculum. The ultimate goal is that from an educational perspective, not only will this drive change, in other words, some of the, sometimes, well, let me put it this way. When a new nursing student is accepted into a nursing program, in my opinion, they're just like a newborn baby. They're not born with prejudice. It's something that is learned. It could be learned from textbook. It could be learned, obviously, once they graduate and are in clinical practice. It's learned that way as well. But sometimes when you're told people from a certain culture or ethnicity, let's say, for instance, the way that they handle pain and et cetera, because it's in that textbook, we sort of believe that. But it is hoped that with the application of the scope and practice standards, that is going to not only change the way textbooks are written and the way that we discuss, culture and races, but it will also change the NCLEX exam as well. The NCLEX exam tends to do a lot of scenarios as they're trying to answer questions, pulling from different aspects that the student may have studied, but hopefully, we see drivers of change coming in that way as well. And another way, perhaps, even in the clinical setting, sometimes as a new grad, you don't want to muddy the water, so you sort of go along with, with what people may say. If I am working in the emergency room and I see that we have a frequent flyer, and someone that I see as a mentor, they've already have begun to think of this person in a certain way, then I'm going to perhaps think that way instead of calling into question. Maybe we need to really look at that person and ask, why are you coming to the emergency room so much? And it could be that they have to work during the day, or there's no health care where they are at, or they don't have a primary care provider. So we have to, really, get to know that individual before we begin to instantly make up our mind. So I hope that that answers that question.
Okay. Thank you very much, Dr. Grant.
Mhm.
Here's another interesting question, or at least wanting your perspective on, concerning cultural competence and cultural humility. It seems that humility reflects an attitude, whereas competence entails a behavioral dimension. What are your thoughts on that?
I would agree with that, but we also, what I would prefer to say is that actually it's a combination of the two together. We obviously we learn things in a certain way, but it doesn't hurt to be a little express a little humility, I guess you could say. I think we learn more when we are in the when we do use that humility approach. It lets us know that to me, it puts us on the same level playing field as the individual that we may be talking to or trying to to gain some information from. And usually you're going to find that the individual is probably going to be more open and able to talk with you a lot more than if we have the I'm up here and you're down here sort of attitude.
Mhm. Great, thank you.
Mhm.
Another question has to do with looking at examples or exemplars of anti-racist policies in healthcare institutions, public health organizations that may effectively protect BIPOC health professionals and patients. Do you have any examples or exemplars that you could think of to share with us?
Uh, Not that I can think of. I do know that as the commission, we are gathering a lot of that information. That those are things that we are exploring as far as what are best practices. Some of these we're getting from, as I mentioned, with the listening sessions that we have done and will continue to do. We're getting information, from those. And what we want is the best of the best, so that I see this document that we will be coming up with as a transformational document, and and one that will be drivers of change. So right now, I really don't want to call out any one in particularly for fear that someone's going to say this is the one that the commission has endorsed and we haven't quite or has taken on, and we haven't quite done that yet. So I hate to sound a little sketchy, but I hope the writer of that question would be understanding.
Sure. And we look forward to the results of that. Sort of going back to the previous question, there seems to be two divides: clinical competency and cultural competency.
Mhm.
Are they integratable or taught separately? What is the best practice to integrate the two?
Oh, it's a great question. To me, I think it's important and imperative that they be taught together. There is, it depends upon the approach and how that may be done. Part of that, with the cultural competency, if you will. I think you may recall that in my presentation, I used the word actively listening a couple of times, and I think that's where we tend to get that, or or to gain better, I guess, or better insight when we are looking at cultural competence that way. And by that, it's important that we actively listen to the individual and not just draw conclusions because of someone's ethnicity or their race, and we begin to suddenly put them all in one box. You're missing out on knowing the individual when you begin to do that. I could have myself sitting here, and I could have one of my four brothers sitting right next to me, but we're entirely different. But someone could could easily say, oh well, because you're two African American men, I'm going to automatically draw some conclusions about you, and they could be totally missing the whole picture. So that's why it's important that we we do that one-on-one, and that we actively listen, and what is the person telling you, and then that's the best way that we're going to be able to provide care for those individuals in those particular settings.
Sure. Well, Dr. Grant, you also mentioned about our need to diversify the nursing workforce and how we really need to move the needle on that.
Mhm.
Do you have any thoughts or recommendations, especially for all of the nurse educators who are participating tonight, on how we can continue to do that?
Well, absolutely. As I mentioned, that was one of my, and still is one of my priorities as president, because I'm a firm believer that nursing should be representative of the people that we serve. And some of the ways that I was before our friend COVID poked his ugly head up. One of the things that I was doing was having discussions with Boys and Girls Club of America. They have these clubs, or excuse me, these activities where they invite boys and girls, from the community, and invite in people like engineers, pharmacists, doctors, and et cetera, to talk about their career, to talk about the need to take those STEM courses and to do very well, and what a possible career that would be. My conversations with them was to say, why not invite in nurses as well, particularly nurses of color, and also men who are nurses as well, and let them talk about a career in nursing. We take the exact same STEM courses that engineer or that pharmacist or that scientist is going to take. We can talk about all the wonderful things that we as nurses do. It's one of the things that I found is that the public, we have the respect of the public, but if you ask the public what it is that a nurse does, they will probably say, I don't know, but I know they work at that hospital down the street or something like that. They don't realize that we are everywhere. We're not just in acute care, a long-term care, or public health, but we have our own businesses. We're in industry, we're in research. I know nurses who work at NASA, to spark that idea. Another thing that I would encourage the professors to do as well is that it needs to start very young. Another organization that I belong to, we have adopted the third grade at one of the local elementary schools, and we go in there. We started going back in there now once a month and work with those kids, and they know that we are nurses. Now, I'm sure that probably a lot of the people who are participating tonight, they don't know that I am 6'6". So when this big 6'6" guy comes in and and he says that I'm a nurse and and everything else, I'm hoping that there is a black or brown boy that is there, or any other ethnicity that may be there, who will look up at me as a role model and say, well, if he can be a nurse, why can't I? So it needs to start at that, probably around third grade, and keep reinforcing that as much and as best as we can. I do know that some high schools have like a health occupations club and et cetera, which those are very good, but it's a little too late at that point, because by then someone probably has already made up their mind as to what healthcare profession they want to go into. But if we as nurses would like to continue to be that role model and to encourage more people to go into the profession, one, we need to emulate the ideal nurse that we want to see, but we also need to show that presence in the community as well, and have those those little boys and girls ascribe to us and look up to us as a mentor.
Great, thank you, Dr. Grant. You mentioned earlier about nurses needing to be present and using their voice. And if you think about the last couple of years, it's with everything that's happened, it's been a time where people are really more cognizant of what's happening in relationship to racism. How do we overcome the fear that some people have by wanting to talk about it, but not knowing the right thing to say, or what they're saying may be perceived as being racist? And how do we move those conversations forward?
That is a really great question, and I think one of the first thing that we need to think about, regardless, irregardless is not really a word, so I'll just say regardless of the race or ethnicity that the individual may be, know that we all come with our own prejudices or preconceived notions or things of this sort, but it's a matter of being willing to sit through and have those difficult conversations. We've got to push through that. Just because someone is making a comment or a statement, and they may say white people this, or black people this, or other ethnicities that, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're specifically talking about you. But they are talking about their experiences with perhaps someone that may have been of the same race. But it's important that we listen, because how else are we going to know where that person is coming from if we don't, listen and actively listen? And don't be afraid to ask those questions and say something like, well, what I hear you saying is that correct or not? Ask for confirmation. Am I really understanding that? And it sort of leads into what we call allyship, or, in other words, if you can begin to identify that, I never really thought of it that way, or I never knew. I mean, like, I'm sure there isn't a black person alive who, after George Floyd was killed, that probably a lot of their white friends or from friends from other nationalities either came up to them and said, I never knew this was happening, or, I'm appalled. What can I do? Or, or things of this sort. So it's sort of, taking the feeling that you had then and being willing to have those difficult conversations and pushing through and coming through on the other side and being an ally, so that when you do witness acts of racism or microaggressions or something like that in the workplace, or even in your community, call it out so that it can be it can be addressed. And like a good example would be, for someone to say to a person of color, "Oh, you speak so well." It's that's one of those little microaggressions. Perhaps they don't realize what they're saying, but it could be interpreted in so many different ways, as in, well, how else am I supposed to speak? I'm a product of the the same school system or public school system that your child may have gone through. And so little things like that, or ways that trying to get people to understand what you have to deal with and how we come through on the other side and become an ally.
Sure. I'm going to take just a couple more questions, and then we'll start to wrap things up. So, Dr. Grant, there's one in the chat that talks about one group that's underrepresented in nursing are nurses with a disability.
Mm-hmm.
One barrier to admission to nursing programs is about functional ability. How do we start dialogues to increase the number of nurses who have some type of functional limitation?
That is a very true statement that the individual has written about. And when I have had conversations with deans and directors of nursing programs, that is something that I have encouraged them to do. I will say that right now, the American Nurses Foundation has just issued a RFA for what we call reimagining nursing. And not only is this looking at the new ways at which nurses can be educated, but it's also an opportunity for, we will be funding 11 pilot projects. And, being, well, for individuals who want to become nurses who may have disabilities, this is a great opportunity for someone to submit an RFA as to how we can begin to address those, those issues. Of course, the other thing too is you do have, in some cases, the Americans with Disability Act, on your side, and those are some things that needs to be addressed. And I know that there's a nurse in California who has actually started a movement regarding that, to have more more nurses with disabilities to be able to to practice. Obviously, sometimes in some cases they may not be able to be active at the bedside, but that doesn't mean that they can't be doing other things within the profession that still makes them a contributing member, and being able to contribute to the profession, as well as contribute to the body of knowledge that we have, or growing body of knowledge that we have as nurses also.
Okay. Great, thank you. So before I ask the actual last question, I
Mhm.
think this is one is also interesting that I'd like to hear your perspective on. In the publication, The Sum of Us, McGee demonstrates how inequities hurt everyone,
Mhm.
not just the targets of the inequity. How has this borne out in healthcare and or nursing, and what should we do about it?
Oh, that is quite a true statement, and I think probably the best example that I can give is that uh, when we look and see that uh, it affects one, but it also affects us all. Because let me give a good example, or what I think may be a good example. Um, we all, if you're actively working on the floor and you report to work early in the morning and you look at the schedule, by the time the few seconds it takes for you to look at the schedule, you're going to determine right then and there whether you're going to have a good day or a bad day. And part of that's going to be the result of who you're working with. Okay. If it's somebody who has a negative attitude all the time, that person that you can't, no matter what, nothing is going to please them. You sort of tiptoe around that, but it sort of seeds throughout the rest of the staff that's going to be there that day as well. And so even if it's a person of color or the attitude that individuals may have, it's still going to continue to fester through, if you will. And because of the fact that no one speaks up and addresses this person, I can, want to call them out and say, what's going on with you today? Or, is there something going on at home or whatever? It just continues to fester and, makes for a very unpleasant environment for everyone that is there. So no matter what you do, it's, if that person's around, it could be considered the wrong thing to do. So I'm not sure if that's a really great example of that, but it does. It affects us all. And whereas instead of having a good positive attitude, there's that damper that you're having to live under, if you will, for the next, 12 hours as a result of just that one person. They haven't even stepped on the floor yet, but just knowing, that person and their personality, it just, goes throughout the whole group. And you shouldn't let someone have that much power over you or your colleagues as well.
Okay, great. Thank you. So, Dr. Grant,
Mhm.
if you could look ahead to a time when we've made progress in social justice, including health equity, can you take a wide lens and discuss what it will look like or how we will all benefit when individuals, families, communities, and society will have equitable access to culturally appropriate care?
Wow, that's that's a really great question and great last question. I what I see is that everyone would be entitled to the same health care, no matter their social economic status, regardless of their race, creed, et cetera, sexual orientation. And actually, what that will wind up doing is I see driving healthcare costs down because if you're able to to manage individuals with chronic illnesses or by having access to healthcare within your community and knowing that you're getting top-notch healthcare and that you are actively participating in the healthcare. You have a healthcare provider who actually listens to you and et cetera. I see the world as a better place. I see nurses championing this cause. Um, Particularly, maybe getting more advanced practice nurses into those communities where healthcare is, or you have the healthcare deserts. But by being able to be on top of things and being in the community, understanding the people of the community, how they exist, what their beliefs are, and things of this sort, makes things heck of a lot better. So I see a phenomenal change in healthcare at that particular time. One of the things that I would like to say is that I also see nursing being more autonomous, within the next few years or so, and it's something that I plan to push towards as we begin to hold meetings to address the nursing shortage. One of my goals is to try to get nursing itself out from under the room and board costs that that you're charged. I figure if a pharmacist or respiratory therapist or physical therapist can charge for the service that they provide to a patient, nursing should be able to do that as well. We should not be seen as a commodity and included in room and board. We should be autonomous and be the true profession that we purport to be. So,
sure. Well, thank you very much. It is time to bring our session to a close. Dr. Grant, it has been my pleasure to host you as the keynote speaker for the 2021 Littlefield Leadership Lecture. Thank you for sharing your conversation, your insights, your perspective with our audience. And there are many comments that are in the chat that thank you for your presentation, your leadership, your vision, your guidance of the nursing profession during this very difficult time. So thank you again, and thank you on behalf of our audience.
Thank you very much for having me, Dean Scott, and kudos to everyone and students. Good luck.
Thank you. I also want to thank our audience members for joining us and providing thoughtful questions. And I would also like to thank the members of the School of Nursing faculty and staff for planning and supporting this event as an important part of our mission to develop leaders for the profession and society. So everyone, again, thank you for joining us. I hope you have a great evening, and we look forward to seeing you at the next School of Nursing event. Good night.